Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 2, Episode 1, The Broken Circle. This season started out even worse than I thought it was going to be, so I'm going to start with a recap of the episode, and then we will go into the review. Just look for the bookmark if you want to skip the recap, although there should be some snark in the recap too, so you probably should listen to that as well. So, here we go. The Enterprise was in space dock for repairs and inspection. Most of the crew was on leave. Una is having trouble getting an attorney to defend her since she lied about her species on her application to Starfleet, and Pike decides to go look for some attorney to defend Una, and he leaves Spock in command of the Enterprise. And that is the last we see of Pike in this episode. The rest of this episode was all secondary characters, which is a type of episode you usually don't see in the very beginning of a season, especially the premiere of a season, but that's what they did here. Spock goes to see Dr. M'Benga because Spock is concerned his emotions may impact his judgment, and Spock is having symptoms of stress. Dr. M'Benga is monitoring Spock's heart rate, which elevates when Nurse Chapel walks in. Dr. M'Benga gives Spock a harp to help him deal with his stress, which Spock goes off and plays. The bridge is being inspected with a bunch of mansplaining. Uhura gets a distress call from La'an. Spock tries to get permission to go to Cajitar 4 for some dangerous situation that threatens the Federation. His request is denied, but Spock and the remaining crew choose to go anyway, so they are going to just steal the Enterprise. They fake a coolant leak to get the inspectors off the ship, but this tactic doesn't work on Commander Pelia. She proceeds to tell Spock a better way to accomplish his goal, a recommendation which he follows. This gets the docking clamps released, and they're on their way to La'an. Apparently, Commander Pelia knew Spock's mother, so we get to hear all about how they were such great friends. Spock does his thing, like we saw in the trailer, and he says he looks for things to make them go, and everyone thinks this is just so funny. They get to the planet La'an called from. It is a dilithium mining planet, and control reverts back and forth between the Federation and the Klingons. Each gets 30 days in charge, and this is currently a Klingon cycle. Marion is drinking a Klingon under the table. La'an is drinking a Klingon under the table, just like Marion did at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark, drinking that guy under the table in the bar that she owned. It was a very, very, very similar scene. Some people will probably call it an homage. I just think that all they can do is rip off other series. They have no creativity of their own, but that's just my opinion on that. La'an is trying to get more info about the threat, so she is setting up a meeting to sell Federation weapons to some Klingons. It's really a waste of time because it doesn't go anywhere, she doesn't really learn anything, and Nurse Chapel and Dr. M'Benga, they go to treat people injured by some photon torpedo blast in the mines, and while they're there, they are kidnapped by Klingons who are trying to restart the war between the Klingons and the Federation. They're taken to a starship being built by this faction, and the faction is going to use it to attack the Klingons and make it look like the Federation did it. Apparently, this is all being done for profit, which makes me kind of think, you know what, that sounds more like the Ferengi, but, well, you know what, I'm just a fan, who am I to criticize? M'Benga and Chapel treat some Klingons, talk some weird shit about M'Benga being at some battle, and then they give themselves some drug and proceed to kick a bunch of Klingons' asses. They manage to get to the ship's transponder and reprogram it to tell the Enterprise to destroy the ship. Spock takes his sweet old time because emotional Spock can't make proper decisions. He finally fires on the ship, but Chapel and M'Benga have already escaped without vac suits into space, but manage to live. The Enterprise beams Chapel and M'Benga aboard, and Spock gives Chapel over-emotional CPR right there in the transporter room, rather than having them sent to sickbay. The Klingons are baffled by one Federation ship appearing to fire upon another, and Spock explains to them that he just averted more war, and the Klingons are skeptical But Spock goes and drinks blood wine with the Klingons. Now they totally believe him. Admiral April basically lets Spock off the hook because Spock prevented the Federation from being in a two-front war. We, the audience, understand that the Gorn are coming, though Spock and nobody else on the Enterprise knows this. At the very end of the episode, there was a dedication to Nichelle Nichols, which was only fitting. However, I can't help but feel like this show is an abomination. I just don't feel right about any kind of dedications to any of the characters or actors from the original series, because this is just not the same show. And that's what I have to say so far about the recap of this episode. Now let's get into the review. Why don't we start with, I don't know, Spock's first command.
When that line was given, I was a bit confused. Because from TOS, I remember the Galileo 7 episode, when they thought they were going to die in orbit, McCoy told Spock something like, well, this is how your first command ends. And then Spock kind of mumbles off, yes, my first command. I guess they're trying to live in the margins there and saying, well, Spock didn't want to admit that he was in command not only of a shuttlecraft, but the Enterprise previously. I don't know. This episode was offensive outside of the dedication at the end. And as you pointed out, dedicating this episode to Nichelle Nichols, something didn't feel right. Let's actually remember Nichelle Nichols. But why do we have to remember her tied to this episode?
She deserves better than this.
The people who have been defending this show, and they're saying, yeah, with Discovery, it was that Klingon war, and they weren't exploring anything, and it was just a bunch of war stuff, especially if we're talking the first 2 seasons. In this episode, not only was there a faction of Klingons that were trying to reignite the Klingon war, now we've got this xenomorph Gorn war coming up. So this looks like it's going to be a war series, or a war season at the very least. How is that getting back to the core of TOS? I'm not sure about that. When M'Benga and Chapel, when they roided up and were just going through the hallways, wiping the floor with the Klingons, I laughed. That was so ridiculous. It was supposed to be some sort of intense scene. It was hilarious. I haven't laughed that hard since some of the season 3 Picard stuff. The space uterus or whatever it was in season 3. Or chucking starships at other starships using Penguin's tractor beam. That stuff made me laugh. M'Benga and Chapel fighting those Klingons after they got shot up with some space roids. That was hilarious. That I laughed so hard. And the ending, when they left the ship and they were embracing each other, M'Benga and Chapel, and they were out in space with no suits on, and then they were out there for quite a while based on the narrative, and they just got transported in. They were just a little bit frozen on the sides, but it's fine. They'll be fine. Little CPR fix that.
It made me think of when Princess Leia was out in space, and I guess she used the Force to bring herself back into the ship. She was just fine. That was ridiculous.
Let's walk that stuff off. No big deal.
Yeah. I will say that it's a shame because I think the actor who plays Dr. M'Benga, from some of his lines, I mean, he was talking about this battle that he was in or present for with the Klingon War that apparently Michael Burnham started. I thought that his acting was actually really good, especially when you compare him to the people around him. It reminds me a lot of the Hemmer character from the previous season. This older actor who still has quite a bit to offer, but for some reason there aren't a lot of roles. And when there are roles, they're very subordinate to people who are half their age. And in Nurse Chapel's case, half his size. And I feel like it's a shame that actors like him aren't given proper stories. In this episode, at least, he was given a few lines, but they don't make sense in the rest of the context of the story, which is a shame, because here you have a doctor and a nurse going through, and I wonder how many of those Klingons they killed. And that reminded me a lot of what they did to Dr. Crusher in the 3rd season of Picard, how she became this warrior who was going around just executing people. And I wonder about these writers. They don't seem to have any concept of
the Hippocratic Oath.
Yes.
At the very least.
Yeah, and what these characters should be. For a character-driven series, these characters' personalities are incredibly mutable and malleable. They will make them into whatever they need them to be for a particular scene or episode, because you don't expect medical personnel to be drugging themselves up and kicking a bunch of asses like that and killing people. That's not right. That's not what a medical professional who's taken the Hippocratic Oath should be doing. But that's how they keep writing them, which again comes back to these characters. They're just there to act out scenes that these writers think are cool. Also, I just want to say, having Spock and company steal the Enterprise, it takes away from Star Trek 3, where Kirk and company stole the Enterprise. I'm tired of Kurtzman Trek appropriating storylines that were done already that happen in the future of the timeline, because it really drives home that this is not original timeline. This is JJ Trek. All you have to do is look at the bridge on the Enterprise, and this is JJ Trek. This is horrible. I mean, this is garbage. And you don't usually see episodes that are so secondary character driven like this until mid-season at the earliest. Because this was like one of those filler episodes that you used to get when you would have 22 plus episodes in a season, where the supporting characters would get an episode of their own. But it was really outside of the main story. It was just to develop their characters. This, on the other hand, this is the first episode of the season. What are they doing?
This was poor. Going back to Discount Drummer and the reenactment of the Raiders of the Lost Ark drinking scene with Marion, that was cringy. That was embarrassing. In fact, that was the beginning of a set of, I hate using the word, but you eventually talked me into it. There was a set of woke storyline elements in this. That was one of them. The second one was the inspection. The two inspectors that were actually questioning the station they were working at, they were both males, and they were coming across like they were mansplaining. One was Ortegas. The one inspector was saying, well, this is all messed up like this. This shouldn't be hooked up like this. The pitch and yaw are all messed up. And Ortegas is like, well, I like it that way. And he's like, well, that's just not the regulation or something like that. You got a mansplaining thing going on there. And then the second one was when this guy was trying to, I guess, apply some sort of patch to Uhura's communication station. And she was like, well, I can't shut down communications. And he points out, well, we're in space dock. And then conveniently, this message comes in right when he's making his point about you're in space dock, don't worry about this. And then this light comes on. Again, some of the defenders said this series, not only does it not have a war at the center of it, but that it's about exploring strange new worlds. Well, now we've got a war coming up with the Gorn, the xenomorphs Gorn. And then two, it's not woke. Star Trek Discovery's woke. This isn't woke. Well, we just had two elements of wokeness on the bridge, and then the Discount Drummer Raiders of the Lost Ark scene. This series, it's almost like, and maybe this did happen, they finished season 1 and they immediately started season 2, and they didn't bother to take any sort of feedback and evaluate what did we do right in season 1, what did we do wrong, what can we do to try to make season 2 better. Kurtzman Trek is so in a rush to get as many episodes filmed as he possibly can that he just barrels on through. I think your observation about, well, this isn't an episode you would expect as the first episode of a season. I agree, except if you take into account this might have been filmed in a big, long succession of stuff from season 1. They may have not have even stopped filming season 1 and just jumped right into season 2. And that's why this dud of an episode appeared at the beginning of season 2.
This is what happens when you don't have proper story arcs, because they didn't complete anything really with the first season. Like, what was the story arc for the first season?
We're not Star Trek Discovery.
Well, I think it was supposed to be Pike coming to terms with not being able to avoid his fate, which is a really, really, really weak story arc. That was it. That was all about his personal journey. There was no overarching story for the entire ship, if you get my meaning. So we wound up ending the previous season with Una being arrested, which, yeah, you could say if this was a proper story arc show, that could be part of it, that it would be a cliffhanger at the end of a season. But because there was no other proper story arc, because that last episode of the previous season was an abomination with their weird discount Captain Kirk, although he's, Lieutenant Kirk right now. Again, copying better stuff that came before that's supposed to be further ahead in the timeline. Why can't people see that they're just cannibalizing the old series? They're twisting it into something else and calling it Stunning and Brave. It's awful. It's really awful. I really think that, again, if this was a 22 episode to 24, 26 episode proper season, like we would have had, I hate to say 25 years ago, that this would make sense because this would fall mid-season. But because of these weird truncated short seasons we get now, they wrote this because, I'm just going to say this, these writers, a lot of them, well, look at Alex Kurtzman. He's old. I think that he and his fellow old writers are still writing for a 22 episode season, and they're just cutting it in half. And that's why you end up with a mid-season to end season episode as the first episode of a new season.
Story element wise, I asked this question last season and they're still making this a thing. So Una was arrested because she lied on her application because she's genetically engineered. How come it's okay for Discount Drummer and she's not being arrested and hunted down? She is the result of genetic engineering, so shouldn't she also be banned from serving in Starfleet?
I guess she didn't lie about it.
So it's a matter of just lying about it is the problem.
And if that's the case, why didn't they just chuck Una out rather than arresting her?
Yeah, I don't understand the whole storyline. And then Pike going off to find this lawyer. It's going to be a super lawyer. Going back to the TOS type stuff that you were talking about, where they borrow from TOS, is this going to be a Cogley from the original series when Kirk being court-martialed? Is this going to be a Cogley type parallel here?
Yes, it is.
I mean, I don't know that, but that's how I'm getting a feeling that's how it's going to go down.
It certainly feels that way to me too. That's my prediction, that that's what this is going to be. Because it seems like that's all they can do is just take the original series, put the plot lines in a hat, pick them out, and try to find some way to twist it.
Other than the dedication at the end of the episode, and we already had our caveats to that, that is the only positive I can think of. M'Benga giving Spock the harp or lute or whatever he plays in TOS. Now, when you watch TOS, you're going to know M'Benga gave that to him, and gave that to him because he has lots of stress, and that's to help him lower his stress.
I hate what they're doing to Spock's character with all of this emotional crap, him struggling with his emotions. He's a fucking adult in Starfleet and a Vulcan, half Vulcan, whatever. He was raised to control his emotions, and if he's struggling with that now, if it's that big of a problem, then maybe he should take some time off. But you know what? It shouldn't even be a thing. How dare they do this to a beloved, established character? I am so sick of Spock struggling with his emotions. This is ridiculous.
How funny was it when M'Benga and Chap were transported from space, and I'm guessing a medical team was heading off to the transporter room. Although, first season, they already established they had a magical transporter in sick bay. If you don't use it for this instance like this, where seconds count, you'll never use it. So what? Do they just not talk about that transporter in sickbay? But anyway, when M'Benga and Chapel materialized, Spock ran to Chapel and was doing like some CPR and going, oh, please don't go. M'Benga's in the background laying on the ground. Spock didn't even check him over. He's like, screw that guy. Oh, Chapel, please.
No, M'Benga's eyes were open. You could see that he was alive.
How do you know he just wasn't they were frozen open? He didn't even put his fingers on his neck to see if he had a pulse.
No, I think he blinked. But,
okay, that makes him okay then. You walk that stuff right off, buddy. I'm going to sit there and cry over Chapel. I'm giving her some CPR.
Yeah. You have that medical transporter that can transport people directly to sickbay. If you're not going to use it for this, you're never going to use it. They didn't use it because they wanted to have that scene where Spock runs in and gives her CPR, and it's just over dramatic and emotional for the people who like to cry over this shit. That's why they did this. It was for drama's sake. So to hell with the established story of how these things work on this ship, even within this series itself, because obviously having a medical transporter on the Enterprise
pre-Kirk made no sense last season.
Yeah.
But they had it. They used it for that story element for M'Benga's daughter. So you got that in your Enterprise. If you don't use it in a situation like this, you're never going to use it.
But again, they just wanted that emotional scene with an emotional Spock, him struggling to get Nurse Chapel to live. I mean, it just, ugh. As I said, this episode was worse than I thought it was going to be. And I haven't even talked about Carol Kane's character. We backed up her initial introduction onto the show several times to rewatch it, and I still couldn't quite get what she was saying. And I think that they think this is a proper Hemmer replacement. Granted, Hemmer, the way he was introduced to the show in the previous season, I thought was bad. But by the end of the season, he was my favorite character by far. And that's saying something in a show that I despise, that I actually liked that character. And I think that tells a lot about what the actor brought to the show. And I cannot say that I got the same thing from Carol Kane's introduction. However, I didn't like Hemmer's introduction in season 1, so we'll see what goes on and what happens with Carol Kane's character. It just felt like comic relief, and I had trouble understanding what she was saying. It's not a good replacement for Hemmer.
Carol Kane's character, to me, seems like their attempt at creating a Guinan-like character, because she's supposed to be centuries old with all this wisdom, blah, blah, blah. This just looks like Guinan 2.0. I'm open to seeing if Carol Kane can bring something. She wasn't given a lot to work with this episode. Maybe, like you pointed out, Hemmer started out extremely weak. In that first episode of the series last season, Hemmer's character was as annoying as the rest of them. But they worked on his character, and it's funny because we mentioned this last season. They finally got JJ/Kurtzman Trek. Finally gave me a character I actually liked, and they killed him off. The audience that they say they're chasing with this series, an older school Star Trek fan, I was warming up to Hemmer, and they killed him off. So I'm hoping they do something useful with Carol Kane so that I can start to maybe find a character that I can warm up to. But what I'm worried about is this is going to be a Jet Reno type character from Discovery, where it's going to be insufferable listening to the snark. You just add a little bit of kind of Guinan wisdom to the whole thing and put a bow on it and say done. But maybe not. I want to give Carol Kane a chance to see what character can be brought from that. But I did not get a good impression in this first episode of this character being something I'm going to be looking forward to seeing on the screen.
One good thing, we didn't have to see Captain Pike cook, so at least that was something, because I was really sick of that last season. But then again, he was only in this episode for like 5 minutes, so it was hard to get some cooking in there, but I'm sure we have that to look forward to.
But even the line when he was talking to Una about he was going to go out there and force this lawyer, because the lawyer's not returning their calls.
They didn't mention who it was.
Yeah. But then he said some throwaway line about, like Una said, well, you're going to go like 3/4 across the quadrant, or maybe it was just all across the quadrant.
Oh, it was the other side of the quadrant in 3 days.
And then Pike says something like, well, it'll be like 2.5. I'm using one of them new shuttlecrafts. Across the entire quadrant in a new shuttle in 2.5 days.
Well, plus, it's like, okay, so I do believe he has 3 days to complete this. So, 1.5 days there, 1.5 days back? What about the return trip?
He'll have a time crystal. He has one of those Klingon monk time crystals, and he'll just rub it like an Aladdin's lamp, and it'll stop time, and he'll be fine. Don't worry.
Maybe Spock will have to go pick him up with the Enterprise.
And the thing is, going back to Spock, after Spock lied, he was a lieutenant. Spock is a lieutenant. This isn't revered Spock at the end of his career. This is Lieutenant Spock at the beginning. He disobeyed orders from an admiral and stole a ship. Even Admiral Kirk had to pay a price when he did that in Star Trek III. And all they said after Spock was off the view screen, the admirals to each other, was, well, he's a good officer and we couldn't afford to lose him and because we got this war coming up. At the very least, Spock should be brought up on charges and he probably should be knocked down a step in rank for what he did. That's what happened to Kirk. No, they're probably never going to talk about how Spock stole a starship ever again.
Nope, never again. No punishment because that's how they write these days. And I just have to say, these Klingons, as much as the ones from Discovery looked absolutely horrible, these aren't all that much better. These Klingons looked like cockroaches to me.
They look odd to me. I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert on like the Klingon ridges and how they're supposed to look, but these didn't look right to me. They look better than those gray purple things from Discovery, but these still didn't look right to me.
No.
So, I mean, I don't know if it was just cheap prosthetics or if they were actually not there. That like they didn't quite get it right. It was a 25% different Klingon.
The ridges, they looked like cockroaches to me. Like humanoid cockroaches. It just, yeah.
And these Klingons acted bizarrely. They didn't act like TNG type Klingons, and they didn't act like TOS type Klingons.
And they didn't act like Discovery Klingons either. I don't know what the hell this was. A reboot of a reboot of a reboot.
I cannot give any positives to this episode. This episode was garbage. I laughed during the steroided up fighting that Mbenga and Chapel were doing. It's like what you said in Picard Season 3, Molly, when you pointed out that Crusher was this bloodthirsty person. Apparently that's what doctors are now in Starfleet. They're just bloodthirsty, violent creatures. I don't even know how to respond in a useful way to apparently what medical professionals are in Starfleet now.
Yeah, and I hate to say this, but the only one that appears to be almost a proper doctor, though not, is Dr. Culber from Discovery when he refused to torture the tardigrade to force it to do what they wanted. And when you can say that he was a better doctor and had more of a Hippocratic oath to him than characters on Picard or on Strange New Worlds, I mean, if you're falling short of Discovery, you've made a huge, huge mistake.
I have nothing more to add about this episode. It was garbage. It was the same garbage that we've been getting for all these years on all these series. If you want to watch it, it's the same garbage as you've always watched when you watch this crap. There's nothing useful to watch here. It's just crap.
I would agree. Yeah. Anyway, did anybody else watch this? If you did, shoot us some comments below. Again, we're going to treat this as a support group because this was really, really bad. This was worse than I thought it was going to be. Also, if you're not subscribed and you like what we do, please subscribe. We do not have enough subscribers to be a monetized channel. So when you see ads on our videos, we are not getting any revenue from that. That's all going to YouTube. So if you are a viewer who regularly watches us or listens to us, please subscribe because we really need you to do that. Thank you for listening. Sorry it was so late. We've been having a few medical issues going on here, but better late than never.
Take care.